$400 billion. That's how much money Microsoft lost out on. This isn't according to me. This is according to Bill Gates. The mistake? Windows Phone. A story of massive egos, misguided management, and just purely being late to the party. This is Microsoft's greatest mistake. So believe it or not, our story actually starts way before the iPhone, but still kind of with Apple. Not with Steve Jobs, but with John Sculley, the man who fired Steve Jobs. See, John's big product in the early 90s was the Newton, which was a disastrous failure, but it did lead to a whole new product category, PDAs. This is like way before even my time. So basically in the 90s and the early 2000s, you had a phone for calls, you had a camera for photos, and then you had a PDA for work things like email and web browsing, that kind of stuff. This is exactly Microsoft's domain, boring work stuff. So Windows Phone actually used to be Windows Mobile, and the first release was Pocket PC 2000. As you can imagine, it looks like a small version of Windows 98 or 2000, very Y2K. Now this was mostly released on PDAs made by HP, Compaq, Casio, yeah, the watch brand. But there were a few smartphones that could make calls as well. The landscape back then is just very different. They aren't competing with Google's Android. Google was started 2 years ago. They aren't competing with Apple or iPhones. Apple was just barely bailed out of bankruptcy by Microsoft. No, they were competing with Palm OS. It's crazy to think how different the landscape was 20 years ago, but Palm was this company making PDAs, Palm OS, and even smartphones. But anyways, there was Pocket PC 2002, Windows Mobile 2003, Windows Mobile 2005, which one of the most fascinating things is how the UI looks like the current Windows version at the time. Like this looks so much like Windows XP but in a smartphone, and then this looks like those Windows Longhorn builds that Microsoft had canceled. Then there was Windows Mobile 6, which looked like a mini version of Vista. I would really like to live in this Frutiger era world, but the important caveat here is look. See, it looks like Windows, and sure, it's made by Microsoft, but it's not really the full Windows. This is a very limited operating system that only does boring work stuff like email, Microsoft Office and stuff. But see, now we're in 2007, so I think you all know where this is going.
Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
Okay, I don't know if you've ever seen this clip, but that was the CEO of Microsoft laughing at the iPhone. And maybe he's not entirely wrong? The iPhone released at $500 at a time when most smartphones cost around $150. And that's on contract, by the way, so the actual cost was around $900. Also, at the time, there's heavy backlash against touchscreens, with people thinking physical keyboards are the future. They weren't. And Windows Mobile held a respectable 17% market share, while Apple wouldn't release the iPhone for another 6 months because it was a software mess. Now internally, Microsoft did panic. Bill Gates even applauded Steve Jobs' ability to sell, but that panic didn't switch into action. Meanwhile, the developers of Android saw the iPhone and completely switched everything to be more like the iPhone. This is the point where Microsoft makes the biggest mistake. Google launches Android before Windows Phone, before Palm OS, before Symbian, before BlackBerry, in September 2008. All these competitors I mentioned, well, they died out simply because they changed too late. But anyways, what Windows was doing in 2008 was Windows Mobile 6.1. This is the first iPhone from 2007. You can see how snappy and smooth it is to use. Now look at how ridiculously slow and unusable Windows Mobile is. On top of that, it wasn't exactly made for touchscreens. There were a few touchscreen models which were the shitty resistive touchscreens. Microsoft was falling behind massively, they just didn't know it. Ever thought about becoming a hacker? But not the kind you see in movies. I'm talking about ethical hackers. These are the good guys of cybersecurity, who break into systems to find vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. It's like being a digital detective. And companies are paying big money for these skills. The cybersecurity industry is booming right now, with ethical hackers and security analysts earning some serious salaries. But where do you actually learn these skills? This is where today's sponsor, TryHackMe, comes in. This gamified cyber training platform has already helped over 5 million people globally learn cybersecurity skills. Here's the best part. It's completely browser-based with zero setup required. No downloading sketchy software or configuring virtual machines on your computer. You literally just click a link and jump into real-world labs that simulate cyber attacks. What makes TryHackMe special is you're actually doing the work, not just reading about it. The labs are built like real attacks that hackers use in the wild. This is literally me hacking into a fake bank and transferring money into an account. It already feels like being an ethical hacker. If all of this sounds interesting to you, check out the link in the description and sign up for TryHackMe and use my code makhir to get 25% off an annual plan. Also, TryHackMe is running a special ticketing event called Hack2Win. From September 1st for 10 days, every room you complete will earn you raffle tickets. You can win prizes like laptops, Flipper Zeros, Amazon vouchers, and much more. If you've ever considered a career in cybersecurity, this is the place to be. So don't forget to check them out, and thank you again to TryHackMe for sponsoring this video. Okay, so not like Microsoft didn't do anything, they just didn't do the right things. In in response, Microsoft did two things. First was the Microsoft Kin. Now, I just talked about this in the last video, but if you've never heard of it, I wouldn't be surprised. This was one of the, if not the worst, most disastrous phones ever made. Even though they were aimed at teenagers, they were hella expensive, lacked basic features, and were slow as hell. On top of that, it didn't even run Windows Mobile. It ran another custom Windows OS. It is said that Microsoft sold less than 10,000 units, and it was pulled from stores in a record 48 days. The second project was even crazier. It was created by the same guy who created Xbox, called the Courier. It was a dual-screen tablet, made not just for consuming content, but for creating it. Now, this might not sound too revolutionary today, but this was before even the first iPad launched. So why was it canceled? Because it didn't run Microsoft Office. Yeah, since it didn't fit Microsoft's view of pushing Windows and Office, Bill Gates apparently had an allergic reaction to it. Not only did they never bring this potentially revolutionary product to the market, it led to key innovative members leaving the company, and the mistakes kept piling on. So by 2010, Microsoft had realized its grave mistake. iPhone 4 was on the way, Android was on the rise, and it was clear that touchscreen interfaces were the future. Microsoft released Windows Phone 7, which many of you probably recognize. In some ways, it was a genuine revolution. Microsoft didn't just slap icons on a wallpaper like iOS or Android. They rethought the home screen completely with large dynamic live tiles that updated in real time. For once, it looked like a phone OS designed for the future, not a mini desktop. Microsoft was confident. Maybe a little too confident. They even held mock funerals for the iPhone and BlackBerry on their campus, literally carrying coffins as if their competitors were already dead. But Windows Phone 7 had a fatal flaw. It wasn't backwards compatible with Windows Mobile. Pre-2010, Windows Mobile powered PDAs and some smartphones, and it looked like a stripped-down version of Windows XP. When Windows Phone 7 came out, none of those apps, devices, or ecosystems carried over. Overnight, Microsoft's existing mobile market share became worthless. And they didn't learn. In 2012, Windows Phone 8 launched, and again, it wasn't backwards compatible with Windows Phone 7. Anyone who bought a Windows Phone just 2 years ago was stuck, and none of those new Windows 8 apps would run on Windows 7. Microsoft offered a consolation price called Windows Phone 7.8, but it was missing nearly every new feature. Developers were forced to rewrite apps from scratch, and users lost faith. Imagine buying into an ecosystem and getting abandoned twice in 2 years. That's how you kill momentum before it even starts. Now, we need to talk about Nokia because their downfall became Microsoft's downfall. Nokia's story is insane. They started in the 1800s as a paper mill in Finland, moved into rubber boots, then electronics, and by the 1990s, they were dominating mobile phones. If you were around in the early 2000s, you remember everyone either had a Nokia or played Snake on one. The Nokia 3310 is still legendary for being indestructible. It is still part of meme culture today. But when the iPhone arrived, Nokia's empire cracked. Their OS, Symbian, was outdated, and their touchscreen attempts were clunky compared to Apple's fluid design. By 2010, they were desperate. That's when they hired Stephen Elop, their first ever CEO from outside Finland, and he came straight from Microsoft. Elop wasted no time. He wrote the infamous burning platform memo, telling Nokia employees that their products were doomed, and the only option was to jump ship. He killed all of Nokia's internal software projects and bet everything on Windows Phone. And here's where one of the weirdest conspiracy theories was born. People believe that Stephen Elop was a Trojan horse sent by Microsoft to sabotage Nokia from the inside. Why? Because just a few years later, Nokia, once worth hundreds of billions of dollars, was sold to Microsoft for $7 billion. It became one of the worst tech acquisitions in history. For a moment though, things looked promising. The Lumia line of phones actually impressed people. The Lumia 1020 had a 41 megapixel camera, which reviewers said blew iPhone out of the water. Ads showed crisp, zoomed in photos of squirrels and street signs, while the iPhone images looked blurry. The design was bold, bright yellow slabs that stood out from the usual black slabs. For once, Microsoft had something that people thought was cool, but the Nokia deal backfired. If you were HTC, LG, or Samsung, why would you support Windows Phone when Microsoft now owned its biggest hardware partner? It was a clear signal that Microsoft wanted to be Apple, controlling both hardware and software, except of course without Apple's massive user base. And then came the fallout. The failed Nokia strategy was the last straw for Steve Ballmer, the CEO who once laughed at the iPhone. He resigned in 2014 and Satya Nadella took over. Nadella shifted Microsoft's entire focus to the cloud. Azure, Office 365, cross-platform apps, essentially abandoning Windows Phone within a year of buying Nokia. Windows Phone 10 did finally release in 2015, tied to the Windows 10 one platform everywhere dream. In hindsight, it was a significant upgrade. It had features like Continuum, where you could turn your phone into a full desktop. It also had surprising unity with the Windows 10 UI, but it was too little, too late. Many Lumia devices didn't even get the update, and those that did were really buggy. It was the third major time that Microsoft had betrayed its own users, and by then, no one trusted the platform. By 2017, it was essentially confirmed that Windows Phone is no longer being developed for, and on December 10, 2019, Windows Phone was finally laid to rest. So why did Windows Phone fail? On paper, it had everything. A sleek UI, a legendary hardware partner in Nokia, cameras that beat Apple or Samsung, even billions of dollars behind it. But it all collapsed because of apps. Google outright refused to support Windows Phone. No Gmail, no Google Maps, no YouTube. Imagine buying a phone and not having YouTube. For younger users, Snapchat never arrived. Instagram arrived, but late and crippled. And this wasn't just social media. Banking apps, airline apps, food delivery apps, essentials that people rely on daily were just absent. Microsoft tried everything. They paid developers to even publish on Windows Phone. They even announced ambitious projects, like Project Astoria, to run Android apps natively. But by then, iOS and Android had a 3-year head start. And in tech, 3 years is an eternity. The app gap never closed. And without the apps, no one wanted the phones. Also, Microsoft failed to understand that the iPhone was never a business product. It was a consumer product. It wasn't made for fancy CEOs working in high-rise buildings who need to get through emails. It was built for you and me to watch goofy videos on the internet or text our friends. It was clear with Windows Mobile 5 or 6 that Microsoft didn't understand this, and by the time they did, it was just too late. The market had left them behind. The late pivot combined with the internal war going on at Microsoft with the Courier, and then the Kin launching just a few months before Windows Phone 7, Microsoft sabotaged themselves. In a bid to look profitable on paper, Microsoft made a somewhat hasty decision. In recent years, even Satya Nadella admitted that pulling the plug on Windows Phone was a strategic mistake. In the end, Microsoft didn't just lose a product, they burned billions of dollars, destroyed Nokia's phone division, and permanently scarred their reputation in the mobile market. Windows Phone went from bold iPhone killer to a cautionary tale of how not to fight Apple or Google. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to click the link in the description to check out Try Hack Me.